This is X on guard. Sam, launch. Fahrenheit north. 04020.
In mid-December 1964, the USS Ranger and USS Hancock, along with their escorts comprising Task Force 77, were underway on Yankee Station in the Tonkin Gulf. By now the crews were accustomed to life at sea. They would be underway for 9 to 11 months, with infrequent breaks, and once on station, there was no change in scenery, just the changing moods of the ocean. The only ones who got to see land were the air crew, but then only briefly, like Viking raiders coming in from the sea, wreaking havoc, and then returning to the trackless ocean. Unlike life ashore that has myriad markers differentiating one day from the next, a rhythm of weekdays and weekends, at sea, every day or night was the same. Flying, fixing aircraft, repositioning the aircraft, trying to stay alive on the flight deck, maintaining the ship, operating the ship, conducting underway replenishment, standing watches, and completing 1,000 other, often unappreciated, tasks. To the sailors, it could almost seem they were caught in a timeless, unchanging journey at sea. 8,000 miles away, back home in the States, folks were getting ready for Christmas and the holidays and enjoying a bit of time off work. Elvis Presley's Blue Christmas had just been released as a single. Blue certainly matched the mood of some of the crew on Yankee Station, at least when they had the rare quiet moment to think of home or of last goodbyes before a very long separation. A month earlier, in November, Lyndon Baines Johnson, the peace candidate, had been elected president in his own right. For better or worse, LBJ and Secretary of Defense Robert Strange McNamara would stay at the helm as the Vietnam War developed. South Vietnam was falling apart. By the end of 1964, the country had endured 3 political coups with more to come. Their army had been outfought in multiple battles, and the majority of the South Vietnamese countryside was under the effective control of the Viet Cong. South Vietnam's adversaries were taking no holidays, but rather were constantly attacking, then slipping away into the jungles, swamps, and hamlets they controlled. These adversaries were attacking American advisors and interests directly, with 24 such Viet Cong attacks recorded from the Tonkin Gulf incident in August 1964 to the end of the year. But the U.S. was not idle. It was building up its forces in Southeast Asia. Throughout the war, it was common to have 3 carriers and their escorts at Yankee Station, at times ramping up to 6 carriers. But for now, Ranger and Hancock were on station in Coral Sea, having just departed Naval Station Alameda on December 7th, would make a 3rd carrier when she arrived at Yankee Station on February 2nd. One pilot in the newly arrived Coral Sea Air Wing had experienced the most amazing luck a year earlier. Lieutenant Edward A. Dixon was an A-4 Skyhawk pilot in VA 155 on Coral Sea. As he was flying over the Sierra Nevada mountains, the engine in his A-4 Skyhawk had failed. Pulling the ejection handle at just 1,000 feet above the mountainous terrain, the ejection seat worked, but the parachute did not. Landing in deep snow without the help of the parachute, he had survived, and after a stay in the hospital, had returned to flying service. No doubt he had hoped his luck would continue as he entered combat. The Ranger, meanwhile, had at least one crew member who, one day, would become one of the most revered naval aviators of the war. Lieutenant Commander Mike Estison was a pilot on a disassociated sea tour as Assistant Air Operations Officer on the Ranger. In a couple years, Lieutenant Commander Esterson would again be flying and would become famous for his acts of bravery in hunting down and dueling with SA-2 SAM sites. He would give his life in the effort and be awarded the Medal of Honor, the only Navy fixed-wing pilot to be given that award for the highest level of heroism while flying missions during the Vietnam War. With the exception of infrequent port calls in the South China Sea, the carriers and their escorts stayed underway and operating. Despite the hardships and challenges of being underway during the holidays, the sailors on Yankee Station found their own ways to celebrate and show they still had a sense of humor. In the dark early hours of New Year's Day 1965, the Hancock officer of the deck, Lieutenant Junior Grade C.E. Barton, followed a Navy tradition and showing creativity, yet meeting all federal laws and Navy policies regarding required entries in ship's logbooks. He recorded the information for the midnight to 0400 watch as a poem. Literary creativity flourishes in the strangest of places. It was good that the sailors found humor where they could, because there were ominous storm clouds on the horizon. Despite the precarious condition of South Vietnam, U.S. political leadership thought South Vietnam might still be saved from North Vietnamese aggression and communist rule. This belief persisted despite facing a battle-hardened adversary, Ho Chi Minh, with strong support of both China and Russia. Not only this, the U.S. political leadership thought they could achieve their goals in a measured manner, not wanting China or Russia to get directly involved in the conflict, as had happened in the Korean War. If there was to be a conflict, as far as U.S. political leadership was concerned, it would be limited. In the early stages of the war, many assigned strike missions showed a political priority more to send messages to North Vietnam leadership than to attack their center of gravity and crush their ability to fight. If the U.S. leadership was indeed just sending messages, Uncle Ho was not picking up the phone. Being this was late 1964 and early 1965, virtually every possible conventional weapon that might be employed by naval aviation against a point target required the attack aircraft to fly over or very near the target with visual acquisition of the target required. There were no conventional weapons yet that allowed a long-distance weapons release that would accurately hit a point target, and there were no weapons that could guide themselves to non-radiating ground targets. The pilot had to see the target and fly over or near it. Later in the war, new weapons would be introduced that would allow pilots to maintain a standoff or at least not to have to predictably overfly the target. The North Vietnamese, with their allies, were not the only adversaries the American airmen faced. The American flyers also had to contend with the weather. At this midwinter time of year, aviators faced rain, fog, and persistent low overcast, which made it difficult to acquire targets and forced flyers to fly low, right in the heart of the kill envelope of the AAA and small arms. Defenses for now were primarily AAA and small arms, some effective to 5,000 feet. North Vietnamese fighter aircraft were in country, but they had not come out to play yet. And although no SA-2 guideline surface-to-air missiles were in country, their very existence spawned a misplaced and outsized influence on the tactics used by U.S. tactical aircraft. Believing that SA-2s were dangerous to any aircraft above 3,500 feet, the tactic of the day was to fly below that. In fact, the tactics of early 1965 were to come in below 500 feet and at less than top speed. This low altitude put the attack aircraft in the heart of the kill zone of the ground-based AAA and small arms, which, unlike the SA-2, were actually there. Some tacticians argued that a ground crew could not manually track a fast-moving jet. They might have been right, but the North Vietnamese already understood they didn't have to track anything. Rather, they could put up a barrage of fire directly over the target, just where the attack aircraft would have to pass to deliver their weapons. It did not help that North Vietnam was building up its AAA assets at an unbelievable pace, from an estimated 510 in July 1964 to just over 3,000 a year later. The danger of flying low had been learned in the Korean War, but it seems to either have been forgotten or was overshadowed by the potential missile threat that did not yet exist in Vietnam, or the false belief that fast-moving jets were impervious to ground fire. The U.S. flyers would quickly find out their errors. The carriers on the Yankee Station had been ready on multiple occasions to execute contingency operations against North Vietnam, but the final execute orders never came. It was a brief and hold situation. A DeSoto mission, that is a destroyer intelligence collection mission, was planned for February 7th. This mission consisted of a specially equipped and crewed destroyer following a course very close to other nations' coasts, yet remaining in international waters. The overt reason was to exercise freedom of navigation in international waters, but the covert reason for the mission was to gain intelligence. This is the type of mission the USS Maddox had been on when the Tonkin Gulf incident occurred in August 1964. But when it was determined that the planned February 7th DeSoto mission overlapped with the expected visit of Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin to Hanoi, the DeSoto patrol was initially delayed and then canceled. It seemed that things would be quiet for a period of time. On February 6th, Coral Sea and Hancock were detached from Yankee Station for a port call in Subic Bay, Philippines, about 600 nautical miles away. They were to remain ready to conduct strikes within 48 hours if called upon. In the early pre-dawn hours of the 7th, any sailors awake on Coral Sea or Hancock were probably thinking of the diversions awaiting them at Subic Bay and along Apo City. But those hopes were not to be fulfilled, for the situation in Vietnam did not remain quiet. On February 7th at 0150, Viet Cong units opened attacks on multiple targets in South Vietnam, including Camp Holloway, a U.S. Army helicopter base near Pleiku. When the attack was over, the U.S. had suffered 7 dead, over 100 wounded, and 10 aircraft destroyed. At 0451 local, Task Force 77 received a message from SINCPAC Fleet stating the Viet Cong had struck Camp Holloway. Coral Sea and Hancock were to be recalled. At 0606, Task Force 77 transmitted that order as the carriers were in transit to Subic Bay. They were directed to get to Yankee Station ASAP. Then at 0736, the expected strike warning orders came. The Joint Chiefs of Staff ordered Navy, U.S. Air Force, and South Vietnamese Air Force units to prepare to execute Operation Flaming Dart. No one could know if this was to be another of the all-too-frequent brief and hold events. If not, within just a few hours, strike packages would be headed west from Yankee Station for a tough fight between adversaries that were still taking the measure of one another.